introduce our juror, Tony Askew, who is a professor emeritus at Westmont. He has a very extensive education. He is currently teaching at the Adult Education Center and has an incredible following. I was shocked to see how many people were on the waiting list for a critique class. And he is absolutely very versatile, very well liked, a fabulous artist on his own accord. He also is teaching a collage class, which I have taken, and it is stupendous. So to keep it short for all of you, there is Mr. Askew.
That would be just great. Hello, everybody. What an incredible crowd. I don't see a lot of you bringing pieces of artwork that I did not accept into this show. That was the format I kind of expected to try and defend myself on my choices, so we'll see. Which means you expect something different than that. Hopefully you've all spent some time in the exhibition. How many of you have work in the exhibition? Okay, only about a third of you. Well, good. That is good. It was a tough one to jury, and if you have time to really look at it, you'll see great diversity, and seems to be the strength of this organization. And when you have a calling for a show that deals with Bon Appetit and the gourmet imagery that makes your stomach turn and so forth, my expectations were very different than a lot of the work that I received, and which I will talk about in a few minutes. A little bit more about myself, though, to kind of help you know how I make choices and why I possibly was asked to be the juror down here. I have been teaching for about 46 years. This is my 47th that I am in, and I've taught lots of things and lots of levels. I think the diversity of my own particular interest in art and the passion that drove me from childhood to, what do we call this, advanced middle age or whatever, has certainly fed me and made my life a lot more filled with joy, let me say that. And that passion that I have for the creative process does nothing but grow. And choices that I had to make when I was dealing with whether to be a pre-engineering major at UCSB or whether to change to art major, and family pressures and things of that nature that feed us, and we make certain choices along the way. I am so ever grateful that I chose the path of art education and the fact that I would have the chance in my life to express my creativity. Brings me a little bit to the philosophy that has driven me, and that philosophy is based on three things. I think they're stated a bit in the biography that they have put up, but they vary in different intent. One of them I call a childlike quality, and the childlike quality was probably the last one that I really called upon in my own education. But the childlike quality is that you have all seen in your grandchildren, or if you've taught elementary school or been around small children. It's that drive that allows them to express themselves freely without a source, without research, and total free expression. What they're doing is driving their hand by what is in their mind, but what mainly comes out of their heart at that time. So I call, that is a very important part of my own personal philosophy. The first part of that philosophy, though, is technical expertise. And I think as I look at the maturity of artists and the kind of artists that would be competing in an organization like this, a good background and knowledge to feed their art experience is essential. We can't rely on just our accidental talent. We do need to be aware of what other artists have done before us. We need to have a background in art history, and we have to really try our skills. And part of that is by attending museums, going to shows, currently looking online to see what other artists are doing, and trying to understand what academia is currently teaching in art. That's the hard part. today, I think, one of the hard parts. So I call that your technical ability and training. That's all the mind part up here. A part that feeds me and has, since I first started doing art, is a part which I would call a Zen meditation. It's that part of art that feeds your soul and that you get lost in by the creative process. Very often, if you're an extremely creative person, whether it's a musician, writer, photographer, painter, ceramic artist, you can get lost in the process to the point that you lose all track of everything else. Runners do this when they reach a certain point in running. They're just in their own zone and Zen. So what I'm talking about in my own philosophy is three things. The educational matter that really matters, that you have that basic understanding of what artists are supposed to do and what they do. Second, that meditative quality that feeds your soul. And third, that childlike quality that allows you to express freely. Now, how you put those together is going to get all kinds of different results. And hopefully, some of the pieces that I picked for this particular exhibit have those three things, or they may excel in one of the areas more than the others. So, as I started out as a young man in the painting world, I also thought that my habit should pay for itself, and that if I had become a carpenter, I would hope that somebody would buy my table or chairs. So when I became a painter, I was hopeful that not only as a teacher, but as a full-time artist, that I would be able to pay for the habit that I enjoyed so very, very much. So this dictated a little bit the directions that I took. My first teaching positions were in Orange County, and I discovered that Newport Beach was a wonderful place to sell paintings of sailboats. And so all of a sudden I started painting sailboats, and that changed the drive from those three wonderful things that feed you and drive your passion and makes you an individual artist to that little commercial dig that comes in that says, well, maybe you could be doing something to help pay for these kids that are coming along and the other things that are happening in your life. Well, I did those, and then I found also that a wonderful market was Victorian houses. So I started painting Victorian houses. So I kind of call that my commercial background that helped me to understand what drives artists in certain directions. But when I came home to my own studio and I had time to do what I wanted to do, I played with the invention of art. The fact that I could create art like a musician who plays jazz. That I could start something, hear what it had to say, and listen to the piece of artwork and let the artwork feed me and tell me what to do next, rather than being completely object-driven. Many of you have done this same kind of thing in your own work. It doesn't nullify or change the importance of object-driven art, but it does say, find your own heart and drive and go for what feeds you, and that's the art that you should pursue. In doing that, of course, this is in the 60s. I graduated from UCSB in 1962. Give you a little, if you're real good at math, you can figure out how old I am. But if you think about the artists that were important at that time, and that I was looking at, going to museums and seeing, reading about, they were the abstract expressionists. And Diebenkorn is still one of those idols in my life. 2 weeks ago, drove to Palm Springs to make sure that I didn't miss the show that's at the Palm Springs Museum that I had missed in San Francisco. So we feed ourselves and we follow those drives. And as an artist, no matter what age we enter this realm of creativity, we need to continuously raise the bar that we're looking at and find ways to increase our own creativity, productivity, and feed the passion by making our work better all the time. And that's the challenge that I would give you today. I have a wonderful opportunity to trade homes with a very good friend in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and for the last 30 years I've been able to spend minimum of 5 weeks in Santa Fe each year printing with a very good friend of mine, a Native American by the name of Michael McCabe, whom I know some of you know, and being able to feel all the kinds of passions that I want to feel as I'm lost in total art for that period of time, without other kinds of responsibilities moving in. If you haven't had this chance, take it, and feed your own artwork. Those kinds of experiences certainly affect the choices that I've made today. 46, 47 years of looking at that kind of art, really a lot more than that if you look at my lifetime of it. The choices that I would make today are very different than I would have made 30 or 40 years ago. But as I looked at the work that was submitted, I looked for several things. I looked for good design and composition. That's something every artist understands, no matter what, whether you're a ceramicist, a photographer, a painter, or doing drawings or prints. That also, good design also involves presentation. And if there was one limiting thing that I would point out to you as a group that limited the work that you presented, it was presentation. There were some very lovely pieces that did not get in this show because of the way they were brought to this show. I don't think the artist realized how important their work was, and that they needed to isolate it nicely in a white mat with a very simple frame. Or they maybe thought it was better than it was and gave me a gold gilded frame about this wide. Both of which do not fit this gallery or this organization at this point. So being aware of that design part is one of the first things I see when I'm going around and going through a pile of work to see how it is. Then I look for content. Do you have an idea? Is it unique? Is the presentation something that is really driven by something that's inside you? Or is it something I've seen before a lot of times? It can be something I've seen before, but it better be pretty darn good, and it better be pretty different. The printmaker Antonio Fresconi, how many of you know of Antonio Fresconi? Anyone? New York printmaker, he passed away 2 or 3 years ago. Spent a great deal of time in Santa Barbara, did several books on Santa Barbara. Beautiful woodcuts, primarily. He came to UCSB one summer, probably 35 years ago, and I had the opportunity to study with him, and we were talking about the content of work. And at that time, people were talking about how important it was to get away and do something different than had been said before. So what did the assignment he gave the class? Do a sun, a version of the sun. Everybody kind of looked at him. But oh my God, we've seen hundreds of versions of the sun. He said, yeah, so have I. He said, I want to print a book on versions of the sun. And he said, I want to see if you can come up with something that is uniquely different and beautiful in a simple print dealing with the sun. Well, he did publish that book. And if you go to the Santa Barbara Library, you can look it up, Antonio Fresconi, Versions of the Sun. And you'll see what came out of that class and came out from other artists with a very simple subject. So subject and content can be something that we've seen a lot. But it needs to be driven by you and presented in a new way that says, this is my version of the sun. And we know that's true if we turned it over to a classroom filled with children. It would work very nicely. Technique is the third of those three. So I've got design and presentation, content, and technique. If you're a watercolorist, show me that you know how to watercolor well. Is it juicy and wet and transparent? And does it read as a watercolor should? Or are you trying to tell me that your watercolor looks like an oil painting because you're using it thick and opaque in ways watercolors aren't meant to be used? You know, if you're an acrylic painter, can you use it well? Do you have the right medium? Do you have the right presentation? Do you have the right format that you're using for your work? All those things make sense? So technique is also incredibly important. I'd like to read you a small meditation that I've often read to classes that I think, put my glasses on, says a little bit about what an artist's dream might be, how you see yourself as an artist. This is the artist's dream, to receive the inspiration to create, to share that creation with others, and to be totally supported in the process. That's a tough one right there. I asked the gentleman to explain further. It all begins with inspiration, he said, an inspiration that calls us to create. Once the inspiration is received, then we can bring that vision into the world. We bring that vision in as a song, a photograph, a painting, a book, an invention, perhaps a business, or another tangible form. After your creation is born, it needs to be shared with others. We don't create in a vacuum. It is only when the vision is successfully communicated to its intended audience that it really truly becomes alive beyond you. Finally, the artist needs to be supported for what he does. If he has made a positive connection with his audience, the support will come. It will come either financially and emotionally. And while it may not always be there immediately, it should ultimately arrive. This is where the artist needs to trust and be exceedingly patient. This dream is not just the artist's dream. It is our dream as well. Through work, through play, through job, through family, vocation, and avocation, you can experience the joy of creating, sharing, and then seeking acknowledgement. Experience this creative process that you will never grow old in spirit. Have you ever known an artist or a dreamer who retired? Good thought for you there. I was talking to a very fine artist that is here today in the group, and she was sharing with me that she's challenged herself for the new year to spend a certain amount of time each week doing art. And she has a partner in that crime, another artist, who is going to check on, so they're going to check on each other. Artists need other artists. That's why you're all here today. That's why you take classes. That's why you join groups. That's why we had a Greenwich Village. That's why we had a Soho. That's why artists migrate together. They want to see what other artists are doing. They want to communicate with artists, find out what's going on with other artists. If you don't have a partner in crime to help you move in that direction, find one. Find a painting partner or find an art partner that will check on you and make sure you're doing your creative bit of business, that you're making your creative drive work for you. It's very easy to forget it and not get it done. 2 years ago when I was in Santa Fe, I realized at the house that we had traded with our friend that their beautiful big TV that was in the living room had 4 remotes. And the first or second night that I had nothing really planned on my agenda after I came home from the studio, I tried to get something on the TV, and after about an hour of frustration I decided, and my wife is a reader, so she had her books, and she said, forget it, we don't need the TV, we're going to be here for 6 weeks, we don't need a TV. I said, okay, that's a good idea, then maybe I should set up a place to work, and I should challenge myself with a program for these weeks. So I challenged myself with 3 small watercolors a week. You know, I was printing all day. I'm primarily a viscosity monotype printer, so it's oil. And I thought I should go back, and I set myself up with watercolors, and I started doing 3 watercolors a week. That ended up to becoming more like 6 or 7 a week. And I've tried to continue that. Now I've got large stacks of these small watercolors. But you need to challenge yourself with that kind of a mission that makes you responsible to yourself. And if you have somebody else to drive along beside you and check on you to see if you're doing it, I think that's a good idea too. I challenge all of you right now, you're all here for some sort of a specific reason. You need something to happen to you today, in this time that we're together, that is going to challenge you and push you as an artist. So I would love to be able to be a motivator in some way to that challenge. So if one or two of you have a question or such a direction, would you share it with me so that I can kind of tend to move in another way perhaps? Yes?
I read from one watercolor process.
Okay, let me repeat the question in case you didn't hear it. What she's asking is, if you move to a place as an artist where you become critical of your own work, What happens to the process?
No, no. The question to you is, does that happen to you, number one? Number two, what do you do when that does happen, or what advice would you give to those of us?
Okay. Okay, she wants advice to know if you become self-critical of yourself, what happens? What I would particularly do if I became self-critical of myself?
Of your art.
Absolutely. And absolutely I become critical of my art. Absolutely. That is part of the whole growth process. You need to be constantly criticizing your own work and looking for the same kinds of things that I'm asking of you. You know, is it technically good? Does it have a good message, or is there a good idea behind it? Yeah, I have certainly failed a lot as an artist for myself. And I think a story of a very good potter by the name of Ken Kagawata, who's out of Bakersfield, an incredible craftsman in ceramics, primarily throne work, but absolutely beautiful. I worked with him in Huntington Beach at Golden West College years ago, and went to his studio, and I saw that in the clay pile where you dump things that don't work, that it was mounded. And I could tell that these were beautiful pieces. And I said, Ken, you know, what are all these good pieces doing in here? He says, I've set the bar very high for myself, and I only accept 1 in 3 pots that I throw. So after I have thrown 3 beautiful pieces, I look to see which is the best, and I get rid of the other 2. Wow. So that is one, you know, that's an extreme, but that is the kind of processing that we do. If you have 1 in 3 successes in your painting, in your ceramics, in your sculpture, in your drawing, you're doing very well. And so that is a really good lesson. What do I do with the ones that aren't so successful? Well, I have stacks under the bed and in drawers, and I keep thinking I'm going to go back to these, and maybe someday something else will happen with them. One of the reasons that I do so many collages is because if I have an etching or a print or a painting that doesn't quite work, I look at it very carefully, see if there's a place in it that might work for something else, and I might save that place. Does that kind of...
I'm wondering, when that happens to you, and you look at it and you say, oh my God, awful. Do you just stop working on it? Do you kind of take a break and then go back to it and then try to look at it and question yourself after a break? What is it that's bothering you about it, or?
That's a very good answer that you just gave, yes. Yes. Yeah, you look at it and you see, put this aside, move it to somewhere else. When I said I start 3 watercolors a week, I start them all at the same time. So that you have 3 things working. So that if one of them gets to a point where you don't know quite what to do with it at this point, it does go aside and you work on something else. The other thing, which is nothing novel to me, but what many artists suggest, is you take that piece and you put it somewhere where you think you're going to discover it the next day and be surprised. So you put it, you know, in a kitchen cabinet or something, and then you open, you go, oh my God, yeah, that's the piece I was working on. Now I see what it needs, you know. So yeah, I think, and you may put it away for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and go back to it. I think we need to edit ourselves as artists too, and not hang on to everything. I wish my wife was here so she could hear that. She thinks I hang on to absolutely everything, that, you know, the stacks of things. But I do thin out things once in a while. But anyway, another question. Yes?
You mentioned that if you were making decisions today that you made 30 or 40 years ago, you would think differently about the decisions that you've made, or make different decisions, and I'm wondering if you could speak to that.
Okay. The question is that I had said that I make different decisions now than I would have 30 years ago. Oh, 30 years ago I was a little stuffier as an artist. I think I had a stronger profile of what I thought was good. And I think if my vision was this wide, at that time it is this wide at this time. I think that experience as an artist, and just experience by age, if we're open and we listen to other people and we see what's going on, we realize there's a lot more out there than what we necessarily may have been skillfully trained to do. My background as an intaglio printmaker was pretty tight. For those of you that have a printmaking background, most printmakers are very anal. And the limitations, especially in intaglio, etching and engraving and that kind of things, are pretty set. You sign them a certain way, you present them a certain way, and the rules are pretty bold. Art has changed drastically in the acceptance of what we accept as art, to the point that I question a lot of the things that are going on. At the same time, when you look at what's going on in academia, we have a challenge to understand what is going on. Listening to young artists is a wonderful way to challenge yourself today and to kind of see what's going on. So the biggest change is I'm broader in what I would accept as art, much broader than I was 30 years ago. I hope. Yes, Roger.
This is about mixing media a little bit, and I was wondering, for instance, you said you started out as a painter, and you're now doing more printmaking. Do you ever feel as though one of your prints could use a little dab of paint here and there once in a while, or do you ever feel there's a way of crossing over and combining those things?
Yes, I do.
Do you think it looks too obviously?
No. He's asking me what I think about mixed media and if I can combine painting and print and that kind of thing. The kind of prints that I'm currently doing, the reason I'm doing them is because they're painterly prints. They're transferred paintings. And there's a lot of mixed media involved. I'm still true to, like if I was working in intaglio in etching, because of the background that I have, I couldn't waver from that. I'd be a purist. I also do quite a bit of assemblage, which is an opportunity to combine everything that you can think of and to have no limitation on it. And where that's a secondary thing with me, it is a wonderful way to move in other directions. I think it's hard to combine certain areas of art. There's some wonderful watercolor collages in the history of Santa Barbara through the work of William Dole, who was an incredible draftsman. If any of you saw his figure drawings and his early drawings that he did, he was a wonderful draftsman and a wonderful watercolorist. And somewhere along the line, by his travels and his collections of documents and papers, he decided to combine watercolor and collage. And he did it very nicely. It's a tough thing to do. I think in viewing other people's art, in many times, if someone is trying to combine oil painting with collage or oil painting with photography with collage, it's tough. I think it's much easier to move into a narrower direction than a broader direction. Those of you that have taken art classes realize the classes that have the tightest limitations for you, or the projects, usually are the most successful. If they say, do anything you want, use anything you want to use, any color you want, wow, what do I do? But if they limit it to black and white and 8 by 10, and okay, you're set up, it's extremely helpful for your creative drive. Other questions? Yes?
Well, this is a silly question, but what do you think about, I've seen the rise of white frames. Mm-hmm. And what do you think about that? Okay,
just talking about the rise of white framing, or simplified frame. White framing seems to work fine. When I look at a space like the gallery, and I'm thinking about all the work that's piled around the room, I want the gallery to read as a gallery, not about a single piece. So the more important the frame is over the piece, overshadows the piece, I don't want it. Because people are it's going to stand out on the wall. If everyone in the group that submitted had white mats and white frames, all we would look at is the art. And so that is extremely helpful. I like to see space around any kind of art to help me look at what the art itself is. Most museums, if you go into museums, most of the work will be consistent with the other work in the room. If it happens to be a French Impressionist collection and they have the beautiful gold frames, it's usually consistent, and there's usually more space between the works so that we can just look at one piece. Blonde frames or neutral frames are extremely popular in museums. White framing is coming in as being popular, and I think it's just because it blends right into the wall and separates from the piece. I use some dark wood frames, especially if I have prints that have a lot of dark in them, but if I do, I make sure I have a minimum of 3.5 inches of mat board separating it, and a very small narrow frame if possible. Does that answer? We definitely have trends in framing. 20 years ago, everybody was using the metal frames. That's what everybody seemed to get. It was new, it was easy, it was inexpensive, and they were very unobtrusive, so it seemed to work okay. But then we went to wood frames. Most people use wood frames today, so. Other question? Yes?
How do you feel about stretched canvases without a frame, or must they be framed?
Okay. She's asking, what do I think about stretched canvases, or do they have to be framed? We have a couple of things happening in painting today that I think are really nice. Some are the wooden boxes, where the artist is painting around the side. It's about 1.5 inch or 2 inch relief from the wall, and the painting just extends, or they could be treated as a flat color. They work well. The painted canvas works well. Each piece is individual. It's hard for me to make a general statement, but if the painting carries around the edge, or if the edge is painted a solid color, usually it works. I'd have to get a specific one to talk about.
So for the narrower frames, you don't think they should be left unframed, the narrower canvases?
The narrower the canvas, the more possibility of framing it.
It should be.
It should be framed, yes.
Can I also ask you too about signing work of art? Some people say you should sign on the back, not on the front.
Signage is changing. Who is? I need some real current thinking on it, because yes.
I sign up all my painting in the back.
On the back.
Particularly in monoprint, you have a space to put it on the bottom, but your cloth,
paintings on the back and
everything else should go in the back of the canvas.
Now, where did you get that idea?
Because I hated my signature to show.
Okay. She is saying that her idea of signature should be on the back of an oil painting or an acrylic painting, because for one thing, she said she doesn't like how much it competes with the work itself. Yeah. If your signature is important enough that it competes, don't put it on there. You don't want people to see your signature first. From the traditions that I come from, work is signed on the front lower right, but it is the artist's signature is his legal signature. It's not anything cute like Lucy with a heart or none of that stuff. What it is, it's saying you did this piece of work. It's giving it validity. And in the printmaking world, it's extremely important that it be in pencil and it's in your signature and it's in the right. So that's the tradition I come from. And I sign my paintings in the lower right. But I try to make it as unobtrusive as possible. Yes?
I worked in Asian prints. What do you think of chops?
Oh, I think chops are beautiful. And I think they belong on Asian prints. You know, I mean, I think, I don't think we necessarily should adopt them unless we work in that direction. You know, I think that's, yes?
In the creative process, and it often feels like there's a fluctuation between being drawn towards representational and just expression and direct relating. And I'm wondering if you could say anything about that.
I don't quite understand a question in that.
Okay.
You have representational art and non-representational art, and what is your question?
Oh, in the actual making of a painting.
Right.
That maybe it doesn't start out as representational, but then things arise and you start being drawn towards making it more representational.
That sounds good. Yeah, that sounds very. What she's saying is, where do we fit in as the artist? And if I started out doing something non-representational and something floated into my room, or I saw something in the room where I wanted to give a doorway, or I wanted, that's the way artists work. That's the way we feed. I don't know, did anyone see the Hollywood Writers Roundtable on public television a week or so ago? And it had 7 of the major writers of the films that are nominated for Academy Awards. One of the questions was, and they were talking about films like 12 Years a Slave and The Butler, and things that have historical background, but they're films. So they're fictionalized to a certain point. And what is the role? All of the writers seem to say, these are movies, these are fiction, we follow our heart and our direction, and if we move in a certain way, we're obligated a certain amount to that history, but we're creating something. You should think of, I think it fits into your question quite a bit. If you have an idea of something you want to do and you're driven in another way, as that piece of art takes on its own life, and I believe a piece of art does take on its own life, then it starts feeding you and you start feeding it, and it may move in an entirely different direction. And I think that's good. I would never say that non-representational or non-figurative is better than figurative or vice versa. That's silly, because they can be, extremely good in either direction, and historically as good in either direction. Does that help? Okay. Yes.
Being drawn towards representation.
There probably is a prejudice with certain groups, but there probably is a prejudice the other direction too, depending on where we fall, in our own artwork. The big question, which I see changing greatly in that same realm, is illustration. Illustration used to be a very negative connotation in a fine arts department in a university or a college. Someone like Norman Rockwell, you could not have written your theme paper on, because he was not considered a fine artist. Look what's happened to him right now. We're getting a museum, we're getting collections, he's going to be in the Met. There's a huge change in how art fits in its historical basis and when it falls into fame or non-fame. Yes?
What are your thoughts about artists using, excuse me if I slaughter this word, giclée?
Giclée?
Yes, as a means to claim that they are selling original artwork, and how that affects all of us who create art.
My background in fine art printmaking really will come through in this answer, because giclées are photographic copies, beautifully printed by the best in the kind of printmaking we have available to us today. But they are photographic copies of a work of art, they're not originals. And as long as you want a good photographic copy, and you want to sell a good photographic copy, and you don't try and pass it on as anything better than that, I think it's fine. I've seen some beautiful giclées, and now they're printing giclées on canvas and all these other things. There's nothing wrong with that, and what it does, as far as the market is concerned, is makes more art available at a lesser price, if that's what happens. But I see many giclée artists passing them off as originals and high-priced, and I've done one of 10 of these, and they're very valuable. Baloney, they're photocopies, So that's an answer. But I would own one. I mean, if there was a piece of art that I really coveted, and an artist had a giclée that was affordable and much lesser price, I would make sure that everybody knew it was a giclée. But it was,
But
we have lots of reproductions.
Some artists trying to put it to the galleries, and the galleries responsibility to not accept it.
Right. Yeah, she's saying, what is the gallery's responsibility to the work that they show and sell? Many galleries are the people that work there are very uninformed about what printmaking is, what giclées are, and what copies are. And they will try and pass things off that, because of their limited knowledge. So you have to be extremely careful of what you're doing. Any other questions? Yes.
Well, this question has to do with the one where she said she's doing an abstract and suddenly she wants to put in, let's say, an animal or something. Well, I did an abstract once and put it aside, and it was in a class, and someone said, "Mary, is that yours?" I said, "Yes." "Did you know there's a bird in there?"
Yeah.
And I didn't know, and she pointed it out to me, and it was very definitely a bird. Then we saw some others. It was the head and the beak and the eye. It was amazing.
Well, what you're talking about is the difference between the viewer and the artist. The artist's intent and what the viewer sees. And that can be extremely, extremely different. And I think as an artist, we are flattered when narrative is read by someone else. But we should keep track of where our intent was at the same time. And make sure, sure. Other questions? Yes?
How do you keep the childlike quality as you're going through intellectualizing the process and learning technique?
How do you keep the childlike quality as you're intellectualizing technique? What needs to happen is your technique has to become so much a part of you that the childlike quality covers it up. So it's sort of like learning to roller skate or learning to swim. I mean, eventually you just swim or you just skate and you can have a lot of fun and you can have a childlike quality experience. But without the knowledge coming easily, so that takes a lot of practice. So you can't freely experiment with watercolor until you understand watercolor and what it does. So that takes a lot of practice. You can't play the piano a beautiful concerto until you've got all the things, and then you can start playing. And if you're inventive enough, you can make your own music. So you have to have the knowledge first. And you can try and playing with it as you're gaining it is what children do. And that's, being free to express. I used to tell painters, especially in watercolor, if I could give them a stack of paper, so they didn't say, "Oh, this paper cost me $6 a sheet, I've got to be real careful," and they could just play with it, they would learn more and they would move faster.
On the other hand, you don't take yourself seriously when you are painting.
You don't take yourself seriously?
Seriously, and not thinking about anything, just color.
Right.
Maybe something.
Right. Other questions or thoughts? Anything else you want me to address? No. Yes.
I'm curious. You said when the exhibit paintings came, you got things you had certain expectations, but you got very different things. I'm curious what your expectation.
My expectation was lots of food.
Okay.
My expectation was gourmet magazine cover type food. I mean, Bon Appetit. I expected, so things like the first prize winner, the bakery cabinet, that's the kind of thing I expected more of. And if there was an abstraction of some kind, I expected it to be based on the concept of eating and flavors and taste and, juicy with that kind of extravagance. I think there is, in any painting organization or any call for entries, there are certain guidelines. There were very few for this show. It just basically gave you a title and you could submit whatever you wanted to do. So I read that carefully when I started looking and thought, well, they're a lot more open than I thought it would have been on a specific topic. So does that answer your question? Yes.
I was playing around with the idea of submitting something where a child was digging in a garbage can. Bon Appetit. In other words, it was...
Sure, you're switching it. Yeah, well, I I heard several such ideas, and I like ideas. The problem with an idea like that is how carefully can you execute it so that your thought reads to the viewer or reads to the judge, so that he understands where that's coming from and chuckles or is amused, or, you know, if it's a political cartoon, sometimes I miss, because my knowledge of that certain politic that's going on, I don't know well enough. I certainly think I would have understood your message and so forth, but I may have excluded it. And here's another thing that happens. When you look at all of the work that you're selecting, and there were 100 and how many pieces? 100 and what?
10.
110 pieces, and what did I choose? 40 or something? When you're narrowing down and you're thinking, I'm thinking of what is the show going to look like? Is this painting going to relate to this painting? If somebody comes into this gallery, are they going to say, oh, this is quite a wonderful organization. Look how nicely all these paintings fit together. Then if you put something in there that just totally doesn't relate to anything, you have a problem, unless you have enough room that you give it a separate place or something, which you don't have. You will have in your nice new building.
So, are you saying that being rejected, having a piece rejected rather,
yeah,
is not at all necessarily a comment on the quality? It may have to do with curating the particular show.
Yes, it could, definitely. Very good question. She said, if a painting is rejected or not accepted into a group show, could it be not based on the quality of the painting itself? And I said, yes, it could be. It could be an excellent quality painting, but it doesn't fit, or the framing is wrong, or or my taste doesn't go for it. It is, when you pick a juror, you pick a personality and you pick a point of view. Somebody else could curate this show and pick 30 different pieces than I picked. But hopefully the show would all fit together in the end. There would be, a strong overlap. Last week I juried the Santa Barbara Scholarship Federation high school competition for some 28 scholarships worth $2,000 or $3,000 each. There were about 40 students that entered, and I've done this for about 30 years. And there are 3 judges. We all judge separately. Then we come together and we've given a yes, no, or a maybe on every student. They each have 6 pieces. And we see how we stand, how we connect. Out of those 3 jurors, we agreed on all but 3. Wow. Very unusual. But it could be, but if we had disagreed, we'd stand in front of the piece and talk about why it appealed to us and why this student should get a scholarship and that kind of thing. Other questions? Yes?
When you pick the work for the show,
yes,
the continuous, do you place the paintings, organize them around the walls where you'd like certain ones to be next to each other?
I did not in this particular case. As I was thinking of pieces, I might have moved certain pieces. Yes, I did. But I didn't arrange the show. Romy and whoever else hung the show did a very nice job of hanging the show. In the past, when I've juried here, I have helped hang the show. But I didn't in this particular case. Didn't somebody have a piece that didn't get in that they brought to me so I could tell them, talk about it? No?
I had a piece, but I have a picture of it, but I don't have the piece.
Okay. Okay. And do you have a question about it? Specifically?
Why didn't it get in?
That is a question.
That is a question.
I'm teasing.
Yes.
So where was there a line between something that would be a craft versus what you would consider art? Like I noticed there were some things in there that I might see as being like craft production versus an actual art.
Yeah, there are a couple of pieces that I accepted that were craft production. And realizing the openness of the application for entering this, I decided I would accept them. But normally that would not happen. You're right. Usually, and fine art and craft are overlapping more and more all the time. So it gets more and more difficult to do that.
How you define that. That was my question, because
craft production. I wasn't sure.
Yeah, craft production is hard to have the fine art line and the craft line are tough. It used to be very decisive in that a story of a potter throwing a beautiful big vessel. A vessel is a practical, it holds water, it's usable, it's fine. The potter threw this beautiful vessel. He steps back, he's in his studio, he's looking at the vessel, and he decides that he'd like to do something different to that vessel. And he takes his fist and puts it right through the side of the vessel. The clay breaks in, and he stands back and he says, oh my God, this is beautiful. This is a sculpture. This is wonderful. It's no longer a functional craft. It's a piece of sculpture. So that's kind of how how it's defined.
Be nice.
No, you can't say that.
No, I'm teasing. I'm totally teasing.
Oh yeah, no, I remember the piece very well.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. The piece is a combination. It's an assemblage. She has 5 spoons.
4.
4 spoons hanging on a thread across the. I wanted something more in that piece. To me, it looked like, well, this person's got an idea of cooking, but it isn't done. That would have.
You sound just like my husband. He said the same thing. I should have listened.
You know, and it's interesting because more often than not we overdo and don't underdo. But that was my call on it. Yeah, I remember it very well. Yeah.
Okay, I'll play the same game.
Uh-oh.
I entered 3, you took 1.
Okay.
I'm curious why you took the one that you did and not the others. This is one of the other 2.
What was the one that I took?
The little figurative piece on the mirrored background.
The nude with.
Oh yes. Okay. Okay. The reason I like the idea of the mirror very much, because of the fact, to me, and I don't know if this is your idea, but what I read into narrative was that our eating habits and our consumption of food reflects on how we see ourselves, and that that the mirror was an extremely, and I thought, oh, what a great idea. We're talking about food, we're talking about how we see ourselves. So that's why I took that particular piece. I wasn't drawn to the other pieces in the same way. So, question? Any other questions?
I do. Mine was a tongue-in-cheek thing I did at the end, and I got a lot of people involved with it and had a lot of fun doing it. But it was an assemblage and a small sculpture, and you probably remember because it was a little baby cow, and I put the USDA choice.
Yeah, yeah.
And I figured it was politically not for this show. Plus, it could have been done better.
Yeah, it could have been done better. I think, to me, it became kind of a novelty, not necessarily a piece of artwork that I would put in the exhibition fitting with the others. It made me smile and laugh. Yes, I did. I got it. And there were a couple like that. Is the artist here who did the piece called Flying Yams? Oh. Was that yours?
Yeah.
Okay, Patty, the very last piece I took out, and I was finished. I was done, and I kept. Now, I don't know if anyone remembers this piece. Very well presented, large, and it had yams in and out of the mat flying across it. When I went home that night during the show, I thought it made me laugh. It made me smile. And I thought, you know, should I have hung on to that piece or not? The reason I did not hang on to that piece, and the reason that moved me to move it, it was taking over. It was a very major piece, and it was very different. And I thought, if I put this with the number of pieces that they had to hang, if they put it on a wall, that's what people are going to see. So there's a choice based, and I thought somebody's got a very good sense of humor and who is stretching, which I like to see, stretching the idea of, you know, the theme, and it was good. I'm glad to know it was you. Yeah.
You took another piece.
I almost pinned it on Jack. I thought this is Jack's piece. Anyway.
The invasion of the yams.
The invasion of the yams.
I made the show in November.
Yeah, okay, because of the holiday. Yes, you're right. You're right. You're right.
Holidays coming up here. Here come the yams.
Okay, I'm going to share one more thing with you, and then I'm going to, I'll take one more question, and then I'm going to close this. Yes?
I have one question, Doug. general, future, there are submissions quite often that come in and there are photographs on canvas, and they are looking very much like it's a painting. But how do you view this as a juror?
Okay. I think she said that there are things that come in for the jurying that are paintings on canvas that are really giclées, and that they're not identified by the artist that submits them. This is the case of getting a good juror, because a juror should reject it, unless it's identified and you say in your prospectus, giclées accepted, which I hope you don't do. Any photo reproductions of work I do not think you should accept, but that's a very strong personal opinion.
Because I feel, when you have a photo, like a Photoshop photograph,
Photoshop is different.
Printed on canvas.
She's just saying.
Oh.
How does this work?
I didn't hear that.
Well, she said if it's a Photoshop color image printed on canvas by the artist. See, that's a different thing. I don't have an answer for that. I think as a juror, I would have to look at it and would have to read the rationale by the artist. And in a case like this, the world is changing. And with the ability to print and so forth, there's going to be a lot of changes. Especially in the area of print itself and photography itself. Those shows are having a tough time being able to identify what they accept and what they don't accept. The show that's opening in San Luis Obispo at the San Luis Obispo Museum is a print show that is excluding any contemporary methods like solar plate, monotype, only traditional accepted printmaking techniques. That's not unusual. But it's a question, because there are so many changes, how are they going to deal with those changes?
I noticed our last printmaking show, and I think Rita Ferry was the judge, were mostly solar plates.
Yeah, well, Santa Barbara's full of artists that do solar plates. Okay, I'm just going to share one thing with you before I let you all go. I'm very grateful for this organization and what you're doing, and if I could write you a big check for your new building, I would, but I can't. I haven't had that kind of career. Are your board members here? I could. Walked in. Raise your hand. Yeah. Well, I congratulate the board on an incredible mission and a wonderful thing that's happening. Your new entrance is drawing attention to the fact that you mean business and you're doing art in a good way. And I would hope that your campaign goes well and you raise a lot of money, and that if anyone is able to write a big check, I hope they write it. And I hope we get this building built, because it's really going to be a great asset to the wonderful town of Carpinteria and to the whole Central Coast. Very good. I'm a great fan of an artist by the name of Corita Kent that died many years ago. Many of you know her, an Immaculate Heart nun who was one of the first feminists who decided in her own way to try to put peace as a national interest, and in so doing got removed from the Catholic Church and the Immaculate Heart Order disappeared, but she did not, and she became a very fine artist and worked out of Boston. She set up 10 rules for artists that I have kept for many, many years that I think are very helpful, and most of you are artists, so I'd just like to share them. Find a place that you trust and then try trusting it for a while. This is a place to work inside you and location-wise. Rule 2. General duties of an artist. Pull everything out of any instructor or artist and pull it out of your fellow artists. Rule 3. General duties of a teacher. Pull everything out of your students. Rule 4. Consider everything you do and experiment. Rule 5, be self-disciplined. This means finding someone wise or smart and choosing to follow them. To be disciplined is to follow in a good way. To be self-disciplined is to follow in a better way. That helps you to get someone to work with that you can, look up to. Rule 6, nothing is a mistake. There's no win and there's no fail. There's only more to make. Rule 7, the only rule that really works is work, W-O-R-K. If you work, it will lead to something. It's the people who do all of the work all of the time who eventually catch on to things. Rule 8, don't try to create and analyze at the same time. They are different processes. Rule 9, be happy whenever you can manage it. Enjoy yourself. It's lighter than you think. Rule 10, we're breaking all of the rules, even our own rules. And how do we do that? By leaving plenty of room for X quantities. That's a quote from the artist John Cage.
Thank you very much.
It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Nothing is a mistake.
Nothing is a mistake.
Before I write that,
We have a really good question. I have a couple people that want to become members, but then Mary brought up a really good question. Our membership now. Oh, I know.
Oh, yeah. You'd love to have Nancy Frena.
For all of 2000.
What are you talking about? I was thinking of your piece where you one tiny thing that one
Whatever.
I just so good box. Yeah, that's why I did the answer. Whatever you say, you win. So if you sign up in June, that's why I was thinking.
So, we're just talking about January, we're getting our database in place. So once we get our database in place, once someone signs up, then that date will be their date for the next.
You don't necessarily have to watch.
But for now, if she signs up. How are you? 2014. So we're just talking January. Yes.
Okay. You with glasses. Everybody go on.
Thank you.
Look like they look piece of cake. Lunch and food anywhere.
Yes, they do say though. It's very fancy.
Lunch and
You can walk by.
Oh, excuse me. Excuse me.
I